Hi, I'm Robert, and this is my submission for CS4085 Computer Graphics 2. So, this is the scene in Unreal Engine flowing through here now. We can see this broken down spaceship crashed in the middle of like this alien swamp forest. This is set at nighttime. As you can see, there are these glowing mushrooms and kind of glowing rocks. Um, it's nice river flowing through the middle as well that is kind of a pinkish color. These mad looking kind of flowers and some bluish grass. These green alien pods you can see popping into the scene here now, and he's kind of crashed in this kind of crater little area here. So after looking at that video there, we can see that while the spaceship is kind of the focal point of the scene where your eye is drawn, it is actually the mushrooms that kind of make up the vast majority of the scene. So we'll just have a look at how those were made now. So, hopping into Blender here, we can actually see that there are two different versions of this mushroom, a high poly and a low poly version. So the high poly version was actually the first version that was created, where I used sculpting to kind of give it all this little extra little bit of detail. And then using the Retopple Flow add-on for Blender, I was able to use this to actually create this low poly version, which has much nicer topology. After creating the low poly shroom, the next job would be to UV unwrap it. So if we tab in here, we can see that I've marked seams along the mushrooms. So this was something that was needed to be done to make sure that there are no stretching over the textures, which was a problem I had when I originally wasn't marking seams on the mushrooms. After marking the seams, I was able to overlay the two mushrooms and go to the UV editing and create a UV map. This allows me to take the detail from the high poly shroom, create a map of it, and map this onto the low poly shroom to almost mimic as if it had the detail without having to have any of that extra topology. This was actually the only model to follow this pipeline. The other models, like the rocks and the ship, were much easier to just model low poly to begin with. So speaking of the ship, let's hop over here into Substance Painter to look at how all the models were textured. All models in the scene were textured using Substance Painter, and we'll just go over how it was done. So first off, in texture set settings, the first job is to bake the mesh maps, and then after that you can hop into the layers. So I've used different layers for all the different textures here, putting them into different folders. So this allows me to put different masks on, so I can only apply textures to certain layers. This is handy because of course I only want the carbon fiber to be kind of on these arms and top part and not on the glass. You can see here on the ship that in the carbon fiber layer we have a black mask that says it only wants to apply here, and under here we have the carbon fiber texture with the color, the roughness, the normal, and the opacity. That's what gives it the texture that it has on the ship. So while all models were textured using Painter, the actual mountains in the distance I used Designer. I wanted to dip my toes in this as it allows you to actually make the textures yourself. By using cells, noise, and directional noise and blending them together, it allowed me to make the different base colors, normal map, roughness maps, ambient occlusion, and height maps. Designer is used to make tileable textures, which is why it was the perfect software for creating the texture needed for the mountains in the background. The grass texture was actually modeled in Blender and then exported as an alpha mask, whereas the stars texture for the skybox was actually just hand painted in Krita. Moving back into Unreal Engine, let's have a look at how some of these materials are actually applied. So the grass, for example, we're using this texture as an opacity mask. We're then creating the base color as a lerp between these two different blues using a per instance random. This is making it so that in our scene, all the grass isn't just one exact color and it's taking an instance random for each layer of grass. We have this emissive boost. This is to give the grass a little bit of color so it doesn't all appear grey. On top of this in the material, we also have this simple grass wind with different values imported, as well as this text coordinate into the mask and saturate. This is just to make it so that the grass actually sways a little bit in the wind and doesn't look completely bland. Arguably the most important material is the landscape material. So for the grass, river, and mud, I actually just have a base color plugged in, whereas for the hills in the distance, I'm actually using that texture sample we looked at earlier. These are plugged into different layer blends, which allows me to paint these onto the scene. Also in this material, we have a landscape layer sample of grass and the landscape grass node, which is taking our grass types that I've created for regular grass and tall grass. This is generating grass across all the grass layer, and the two different grass types, as you can see, are the shorter grass and the taller grass. Wrapping things up for materials, you can see that we have this emissive texture sample multiplied by a value of 3 typed into the emissive color, which is what gives these mushrooms the bright pink glow that illuminates the scene. Moving on to some effects, I tweaked the basic explosion effects Niagara system in Unreal Engine to make it look like more of a broken down ship special effects. The river in the scene is actually just a plane with this texture on it. It's got two different panners with two different normal maps placed over it to give it this effect that it's actually moving. As well as this, I've also had to tweak the lighting in Unreal Engine to make it seem as though it was nighttime and turn off auto exposure so that the mountains in the distance aren't completely bright. Overall, I'm very happy with how this project turned out, and I think it came together as one cohesive scene in the end.